Great, thanks, Bill, and welcome again, everyone. So as I was mentioning, I don't think we have anyone from the public here, so I will, unless anyone else has comments, I'll just jump right in. And unfortunately, sharing a first update is that I will sadly be leaving the project team starting at the end of this month. I'm not leaving PBOT, but I am transitioning into a project management role, and so I'll be hopefully building out a lot of the projects that are recommended in this plan, and some other projects largely focused around Central City. So I'm excited about sort of learning new skills and learning new things and getting projects built. But definitely this was a project that was hard to leave, especially as we're like really close to moving things along and really getting this plan finalized. So but I leave you all in good hands. Mauricio, my supervisor, is here to sort of really help direct, but Shane Valley, who's on the call, is going to be sort of helping co-lead the project with Bill, and then Zeph will also be helping out as we develop projects and sort of finalize any of the sort of detailed project definitions as we advance the plan forward. So yeah, but I really appreciate everyone's it's been awesome just getting to know all of you and getting to know this area, and so super excited about seeing this plan get finalized and then and be able to advance these projects. So that's the big news. Sorry, it was like back to back, I think, with Marty a meeting or two ago, and then with myself now, but we leave you all in good hands, and we're really excited about how we develop these projects and are able to move forward. So I am going to go ahead and reshare my screen, and we'll get started because I'm not leaving tonight. We've got some exciting stuff to share this meeting. Can you see that? Bill, can you?
No.
You can't? Okay, hold on a second.
And thanks, Brian.
You will be missed. And I did want to clarify, Harrison Hastings, new to the team, as he mentioned. He is our new community services aide, so it's going to be pretty critical for moving a lot of pieces in the project forward, especially as we start getting into community engagement again.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Thanks, Bill. And I should mention too that yeah, Shane has to leave. He's double booked for a meeting. So thanks, Shane, for coming by. You'll see he's been consistent during this process. You'll see him at the next meeting as well. So thanks for coming by, Shane. And again, just reminding everyone of the goals of the project. I think you're very familiar with what we're doing at this point, but again, we're really looking at sort of improving and increasing commercial opportunities, businesses, housing affordability and choice, transportation options, and then also thinking about all these things from an anti-displacement lens. So we'll be really touching on a lot of these things tonight, and also the funding aspect as well. Already went through the updates, but I'll just jump right in, and Bill, I'll let you take it away here, and just let me know when you want me to advance to the next slides.
Sure. Just going to share a few
Zoning changes that have been in the works. And just to remind people, as we're beginning to get, or we've been looking at our zoning map and ways it can change, the whole intent is to implement the preferred community development scenario, which was the centers and corridors concept, which received the most public support. And as you may recall, it includes establishing a new neighborhood center in the area for to really serve as a hub for businesses and community services. And also there's a lot of support for expanding housing options on the major corridors like 52nd and 72nd, as well as taking some measures to strengthen the smaller commercial areas at the major intersections, such as at 52nd and Duke. So with that, I'm just going to launch into the zoning map. And next slide, please. Not going to talk about this in any great detail. This is we shared this with you a couple months ago. Just it's really intended to transfer the concept for centers and corridors into the zoning map. And what I'm going to talk about today is really highlighting some of the changes since we last met. Next, please. And one thing just to be aware of, what we're showing in the circles here are some of our existing designated centers, such as the Woodstock Main Street, the Heart of Foster, and Lentz. And when we're talking about establishing a new neighborhood center at 72nd and Faville, part of the idea is that it would help fill in that gap in access to services, which is a big reason for why we, of course, looked into this project. And you can kind of see in that dashed circle, which is showing about a half-mile walkable distance, that it does a fair amount to fill in that gap. Next, please. This is showing the changes we're considering at this point. And I should mention that we've met with a number of community groups over the last few weeks. We've met with the Brentwood Darlington Neighborhood Association, with 82nd Avenue Business Association, and with Southeast Uplift. And we're going to be going to Mount Scott Arleta on February 1st. And we still need to meet with Lentz. But based on what we heard from this group and Brentwood Darlington and the 82nd Avenue Business Association, we're looking at that idea of applying commercial zoning in the vicinity of 82nd and Faville. And I'll talk about that a bit more. And something that's new to the concept are the green circles down below near the Springwater corridor. And these are some BES owned properties that they would like to have rezoned to open space and to work on habitat restoration. And I'll have another slide on that soon. Next, please. Just zeroing into the neighborhood center. And we've just been labeling it the Brentwood Darlington Neighborhood Center, just because it's almost wholly within that neighborhood. But I'm going to zoom in a little bit more on the next slide. Just to remind you, one aspect of the zone changes is to establish a new small commercial main street on 72nd near Faville. It's at a circle towards the left, or oval shape. And there's interest in having the eastern end of the neighborhood center anchored by the area around 82nd and Faville. So in a way, having a bookend to the center. You have a fair amount of multifamily in between, but having commercial services both from towards the west and to the east. Next, please.
Yeah, and Bill, as I go to the next slide, can you just share what EG1 stands for?
Yes.
And the next one is an opportunity to do that.
Okay.
But EG1 is employment zoning. Oops, just a moment. I accidentally left my screen view. But yeah, the existing employment zoning is intended for employment or light industrial type uses. It also allows gas stations and self-service storage, drive-throughs. It does not allow residential. Although if you look at that map on 83rd, just north of Faville, those small lots are all residential. So it's an area that does not currently allow residential, but it definitely has those uses. And I should mention that when this area first became part of the city in 1986, it had commercial zoning, and it had commercial zoning through 1996. And then during the Outer Southeast Community Plan, it was changed to employment. But we had talked about having commercial mixed use zoning, CM2, which would allow a broader array of retail and service uses, and would have some more limitations on gas stations and self-service storage, and it would allow residential as well. And again, based on what we heard, we're going to be exploring that option further. Next, please. And the pink dashed line is showing the potential boundaries in the comprehensive plan of that neighborhood center, and it extend roughly from Henderson and Knapp down to Lambert. And basically the portion of 82nd where we'd look at going from employment zoning to commercial mixed use would basically extend that multifamily area eastward. And I should mention, we also took a close look at what the uses were. It's not a lot of industrial employment uses. There are some motels and convenience stores and some bars, as well as some retail and service type things. Next, please. Before I leave, I wanted to see if there are any questions about this. And I'll talk too about some of the next steps for really exploring these potential zone changes. But any questions? And one thing I mentioned, we really want to talk to Lentz. We aren't really proposing many zone changes in Lentz, but this employment to commercial mixed use zoning between 82nd and 83rd would be affecting Lentz, as well as some of the open space changes.
Okay, next, please. This is just showing in some
Greater detail, the BES zone properties. There are two areas where there's some clusters of properties over by Southeast 45th and Harney. I believe this includes the old Lev Bakery site. But at any rate, these are all areas, and kind of see the aerials. The aerial and outlined in red is showing the properties that would be going, that BES, Bureau of Environmental Services, is requesting be rezoned to open space. And nearly all these properties have a lot of environmental overlay zoning, and they're also often in the floodplain. And down below is the other concentration of properties. And you could see that it's over just to the east of 82nd, also by Harney. And this has some employment and industrial zoning. And I should mention that this is something we're still having discussions internally, because there is some policy about limiting the loss of employment land. And there's a 3-acre chunk of employment zoning where the OS label is right on top of it. And there are some policy issues we need to look at. Any questions about this? So this is not something we'd shared with you, but again, the idea is BS would like to do habitat restoration on these properties, which already have actually substantial environmental constraints or floodplain constraints.
So Bill, I have a question on the 45th and Harney area. I believe there are some existing businesses that are now shown in red. Would those businesses be acquired and demolished, or how does that work?
The aerial,
it's showing, let's see, the only business that would go away is, I think, what was the Love Bakery site, more in the
Fran's Bakery has been demolished.
I'm sorry, Fran's Bakery. But what's on the other side of the street, the west side of the street, that is not being acquired, so that would stay.
So the one directly across Harney Drive, I think opposite the old Friends Bakery site, bordering Johnson Creek, this little pie-shaped area, isn't that the strip mall with Johnson Creek Rentals abutting 45th, adjacent to 45th?
I think so.
Just to highlight, is this one of the sites that's outlined in red?
Yes.
Okay, and it looks like it's currently in the R5 zone. So it sounds like it would be a non-conforming type use.
And if that is the case, then do you apply eminent domain, or how does that work?
We're having a meeting with BES soon. These are sites they're either have acquired, or I believe are nearly finished with the process of acquiring. And again, this is all very tentative. It's just the requests we had from the Bureau of Environmental Services. But that's a good question I could raise with them, just
Okay,
checking on the status of that.
Yeah, and Bill, I know we've been talking with them, and I don't believe that they've acquired, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but the sort of building directly across 45th from the Fran's Bakery site, and then also the rental property. I don't believe they've acquired those two properties yet, but are working on some of these other areas that are marked as open space. And I think it is just a sort of balancing act between sort of their project and the needs for that Oxbow restoration project, as well as sort of helping get these properties that are that would be, you know, potential flood event. So I don't know where they're at with those negotiations, and again, like Bill mentioned, we can talk with them. But
And my
yeah.
first blush, excuse me for interrupting, is that
Okay.
might be a good thing because that's one of those dangerous intersections and it's very crowded there with Fuzzy Creek rentals. And so if you open it up, it might help with traffic flow as well.
And just to clarify,
That pie-shaped property that where the R5Z label is on top and the aerial is not one of the properties that's in question. It's the one just to the north that's outlined in red.
Okay, thanks.
we'll confirm the
Status of these with BES. We would not be changing the zoning without you know, the permission of the property owner on these ones. And I don't think we'd be doing this until BES has acquisition if some of them aren't acquired yet.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Let's move on to the next slide. I know we have a lot on our agenda. I just wanted to say a little bit about what's been in process related to these potential zone changes. And I should mention that it's not a formal proposal yet. We're still in the process of exploring these possibilities. One thing we've been doing, and this is related to preventing a displacement, as we've been identifying where existing low-cost apartments are, with the ideas of avoiding applying higher density zoning to them that could add to redevelopment pressures. So we've been pretty much sticking to low-scale multifamily zoning where those existing low-cost apartments are. And we're also in the midst of an economic analysis looking at what the potential impacts of the zone changes could be, both in terms of economic feasibility and potential displacement. So that's something in the works. And a key thing that's in the works too is we're doing some growth modeling based on the potential zone changes. And that's going to be used to assess whether there's some infrastructure issues, whether it's a transportation, sewer or stormwater or water. So that's something I should mention. I've been using that term a lot, but there's a lot in the works. And if there are significant infrastructure constraints, there is a possibility we can revise that proposal further. And I already mentioned that we've been talking to neighborhood groups, and we'll be doing some more of that before we release this to the broader public. The big date we're really aiming for is to get a discussion draft to be shared broadly with the community in March. And March and April, we're really hoping to go pretty broad and deep with the community engagement with the proposals, and really want to hear from the community as to what they think about the draft map and the draft document. I also wanted to mention that the discussion draft and what we hear from the community is something that could shape the proposal, including the zoning proposal further. The intent is to get to a proposed draft in June. And once we refine things to get to the proposed draft, that is what will be reviewed by the Planning Commission, probably later in the summer. Once Planning Commission goes through their hearings and discussion and get to their recommendation for the plan, the next iteration is that recommended draft. So and that's another point where there could be changes. The recommended draft is what goes to City Council for their consideration. And both for the Planning Commission and City Council, there'll be opportunity for public hearing and testimony. So I just wanted to highlight the fact that these proposals we're talking about, including the zoning, are definitely not done deals. It's definitely an iterative process. Any questions about that?
maybe I have one with a discussion draft in March. Is a broader community engagement then in April, or does it already start in March?
It's partially, we don't
Have a fixed date for when we'll release the discussion draft. But what we would be doing is, once we do release it to the public and people can review it, we'd be going out to the public. And we still have to discuss, in fact, to what extent is this going to be in place meetings? It's more than likely there'll also be online options for input. But as we get into March, we are thinking, and this is something it'd be good to get your feedback in at some point, about having some in place real-time meetings.
Okay, thank you.
And Valeria?
Yeah, I guess two things. One is, I'm guessing that once you make that presentation to the Planning Commission, I would maybe suggest, because I've seen many of these plans go in front of the Planning Commission, that we have a representative from this group to support staff as they present the concepts and the recommendations for this plan. And to just a reminder that, you know, even when I go to the Planning Commission and the City Council, we still have the opportunity to provide input and still be engaged and advocate for the different recommendations and ideas that we're bringing forward, and maybe a chance to also expand or explain some of the thoughts behind some of those, the rationale behind those recommendations. So each step of the process still has its own opportunity for public involvement.
very true. And
Thanks for that, Valeria. And I like the idea of having a representative from the Project Advisory Committee as part of that presentation to the Planning Commission. We'll definitely keep that idea in mind. Any other questions? All right, let's move on to the next slide. And one of the documents we shared with you was a list of potential anti-displacement strategies. One thing we wanted to do as part of this plan was, along with these transportation improvements, potential zone changes, is to make recommendations for actions to help provide a residential and business stability. And I actually wanted to check with people. We've been talking to a number of groups, and including our technical advisory committee. Have we shared the potential anti-displacement strategies with the PAC, with you all? I see Valeria nodding her head.
so
I haven't seen it.
you haven't seen it. Okay. We're not going to be
Entirely able to do this justice, and we might have to return to it in February. And Nick, especially with your involvement in affordable housing, may especially need to meet with you. But since it's new to many, if not most of you, I think I'll run through this. And a major caveat is, with these anti-displacement strategies, we don't have a big pot of money in which we'll be able to immediately start implementing these ideas. But what we're doing is basically creating a starting place and recommendations for strategies to really implement these ideas. And I'm going to try to run through this as fast as I can. Let's see. Well, it sounds like you may have seen it, so I'll go through it pretty briefly. There are a number of actions related to housing affordability and stabilization. One is it's related to the fact that the primary tool we have to require affordable housing as part of new development is what we call inclusionary housing requirements, and that applies to larger projects with 20 or more units in the multi-dwelling and mixed-use zones. And amongst our proposals is expanding those areas where there'll be multi-dwelling and mixed-use zoning, which will increase opportunities to get inclusionary housing requirements in place for affordable housing. I already mentioned the strategy of limiting redevelopment pressures on existing low-cost apartments. That's part of the approach we've used in our mapping. So trying to keep the allowed scale fairly low scale where you have existing low scale affordable apartments. Another thing that's part of this effort is to reach out to faith-based and nonprofit property owners to see whether there's interest in doing affordable housing projects on their properties. And this could have implications for refining the zoning map to allow affordable multi-dwelling development on those sites. Another one, which is new from the version you may have seen, was just at least putting out the idea of whether there could be any local preference policy for affordable housing projects receiving city funding in the area. One concern we had heard was if you just get affordable housing units in there and it's all for an entirely new people, are we doing anything to create stability for some of the population there? These are definitely things we need to discuss further, including with BPS management and other city bureaus. There's also a concept in trying to strengthen people's access to economic opportunity in terms of home-based businesses on the corridors, like 52nd and 72nd. The approach we would take would make it easier for people to expand their home-based businesses or other small businesses in multi-dwelling zones along those corridors. And then for commercial mixed-use development, one thing we wanted to explore with the commercial zoning on 82nd is whether this could provide some stability that's closer to what's already happening in activity on 82nd in that area. As I mentioned, most of the businesses there are already commercial or motel type uses. We also have a tool where if new development happens, they can get some development bonus if they include affordable commercial space as part of that new development. And that's something we'd want to encourage moving forward. And I believe there are a couple of hands up. Oh, I see Anna and then Mike.
Yes, I have a question about this affordable housing program. We just had last Wednesday a meeting at our neighborhood with Mark Gamber, State Representative Mark Gamber, and he spoke to some bills coming in that address actually those problems of like the keeping the locals and help them, which also requires not just a focus on the housing issue or the small business issue, but actually also addresses the question for service programs that before people get actually into, disarray, to actually keep them local and housed. And I wonder if that's something that needs to be incorporated in this as well.
Yes, that's a very good
point. And one of the actions, or a few of the actions that are coming up are very much related to that. And we'll get to that. Mike. Mike, you had a question or a comment?
I do. I was trying to turn my video on.
Sure.
I've got two. One is I see numerous avenues here identified for housing affordability and stabilization, but I don't see anything about any incentives to convert these gigantic parking lots into housing people instead of cars. And if we could take a look at doing something like that. And the other question is identifying faith-based owned properties for expanding affordable housing. Does that mean that they get to build on that land and still own it and reap the untaxed benefits, or would they sell off those pieces for a developer to build the housing?
A lot of the things I've seen that were on faith-based properties or basically partnerships with community development corporations In terms of the ownership, I think it varies. And so, I mean, some of your question is about whether it would be taxed or not, given the fact that the church properties are not. I believe in most situations I've seen where a nonprofit housing developer has control over the housing property, I believe there is some taxation, but I'd have to follow up. That's a good question. I don't know if Nick would be able to shed any light on that in terms of church or faith-based properties where affordable housing takes place.
Yeah, that could either be done by selling the property to the developer or through a ground lease where the church would maintain ownership and lease the land.
Great. Well, thanks, Nick.
And if they lease that land, does that mean that they could build lots of housing on it and not have to pay any taxes into the public coffers for housing that for providing a place for housing? I'm just curious of how that works. It seems a little sketchy to me.
Depends on the affordability level that if the rents are below 60% of area median income, then generally that would be tax exempt.
All right, thanks. And I should, as I know we're not going to have enough time to fully discuss this possibility, so I really encourage people to send questions to me, and we could see if there's enough that really is not coverable today that we should carry it into February. We're going to go to the next slide, Brian. These are more related to beyond affordability or affordable housing, although with the first one, under community development and homeless prevention, one was looking at partnerships with affordable housing providers or community development corporations on development initiatives or land banking in the area. That had been on the list for a while. We added some that are really about connecting people to economic opportunity, including the idea of working with nonprofits on possibilities for creating affordable business incubator space as pathways for lower income folks, including immigrants and communities of color, to be able to establish businesses. And another idea was working with businesses and workforce development organizations to connect lower income community members to living wage jobs in the area. So one thing you've heard in some conversations is not just about affordable housing, it's about connecting people to economic opportunity. And there's also that idea, which had been on the list for a while, of whether or not that Brentwood Darlington Neighborhood Center could potentially become a future neighborhood prosperity initiative area. So similarly to the J District or the Park Roads, historic Park Roads, Main Street area, which are both neighborhood prosperity initiative locations. And that tends to bring more resources for community economic development efforts, which have been happening in both those areas, for example. Valeria.
Yeah, could I request, I think in the first bullet point of partner with affordable housing providers, CDC and development initiatives of land banking in the area, I think I would add also either that or create a new bullet point that says also like work with nonprofits or with the affordable housing providers to increase middle housing in the area as well, because there are, I believe, as I understand it, a lot of more opportunities for folks to put ADUs in their backyards and have like an 8-year affordability covenant that would require them to maintain those ADUs affordable for at least the first 8 years. I think it's 80 AMI. And so they wouldn't be converted to Airbnbs and they couldn't be short-term rentals. So I'm just thinking like as much as we, just like adding, I think that that additional like infill opportunities in the area would be helpful.
Yes, we can do that. And we could also, the residential infill project definitely expanded opportunities, and we could call out especially the opportunities calling for that kind of development to be affordable, which could also bring affordable homeownership opportunities, and especially if they're doing townhouse type development.
Yeah, the only organization that I know that provides that kind of opportunity, and I know because I'm doing that, is with Back Home ADU. It works in all the counties, but it's done very successfully in Portland. I think they have a few ADUs in Northeast Portland. And they don't require any kind of down payment. They can do even like 2 units. So just understanding the opportunities that we have with the sizes of the lots in Southeast Portland, which I think have been not as tapped as like the areas in Northeast Portland. I think that it could provide a lot of potential in that, and it could be for intergenerational living, and and other kinds of opportunities. So thank you.
Scott.
Yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with Back Home ADU. It seems like they do really neat things that have interesting financing models. Can people hear me? Looks like it froze.
You're cutting
Your
in and out a
visuals.
little bit.
Cool. I would be interested in knowing if, with organizations like Back Home ADU, if through this project we can also have partners with private groups in addition to nonprofit groups, and do everything we can in our wheelhouse to make partnerships in order to provide additional housing, especially like ADUs, that there's some innovative and interesting financing methods that bring lower income folks that might not otherwise be able to afford the massive upfront costs, that if through this project we can help facilitate and grease those wheels, that would be great to include.
Good idea. I appreciate that.
I mentioned so, Back Home ADU. We'll look into that. Also on this slide, and this nests pretty well with what precedes it, but amongst the recommendations are coordinating with the 82nd Avenue planning effort, also known as Build a Better 82nd plan. And that plan has more resources than we do for how residential and small business stabilization. And of course, especially with the neighborhood center portion of this study area, or the Brentwood Darlington neighborhood center being so close to 82nd, it's essentially part of that broader 82nd Avenue corridor. That project's also been looking at workforce development approaches to connect lower income people to good jobs. So having that in the works provides us an advantage for this project. And we would want to make sure that there's an appreciation for the fact that the multi-dwelling zoning in the lower Southeast Rising area is really an important resource for low-cost housing around the 82nd Avenue corridor. So that's something we definitely want to make sure is clear moving forward. Just opportunities for what we're trying to achieve in lower Southeast is coordinated with the broader 82nd corridor work.
Thanks, Bill. And just to do a time check, it's 7:30. So we have Gina coming in 10 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. I just have one more slide. If you go to the next one, this is a new grouping of actions, and it's related to the Brentwood Darlington Community Center, and the idea of nurturing it more as what could be described as a resilient center. We've met with Impact Northwest, and they're really interested in having that community center evolve in its functions and to become more of a resource hub that would connect residents, especially lower income residents, to resources and services. So, and a thing we've heard is a lot of people don't know how to get connected to affordable housing resources or employment resources. The community center also offers childcare, but connecting people to resources that could support stability for households, whether it's housing stability or employment stability, and childcare is pretty critical too for people, especially being able to work. Part of the concept too with the Brentwood Darlington Community Center is it being a go-to place in more ways than one. Also being a resilient center when it comes to emergencies or extreme weather events. Some interest in it serving as a warming or cooling shelter, a temporary shelter, and a place with resilient energy sources, solar that could continue to function through power outages, allowing it to be a place where people could go to connect their mobile homes for recharging and other charging needs. And so having an already existing community partner interested in doing these things is somewhat of a unique resources in this area. I've done a lot of work in East Portland, and what you have, at least as a start for some of these things in the Brentwood Darlington Community Center is something that is a resource that could really be something more than it already is. Any questions or comments on that one?
Bill, just that the Brentwood Darlington Neighborhood Association is very supportive of this concept, so thank you.
Sure. And again, I know
We have limited time. Do feel free to contact us with your ideas. We didn't give you a whole lot of time to chew on that list. That list also included some existing anti-displacement strategies, just more of an FYI. But with that, let's again, contact us if you have great ideas. We're always interested in great ideas. I'm turning over to Brian now. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And unfortunately, we're not going to have a ton of time to discuss this just because we have Gina coming in a few minutes. But I do want to sort of name some of the work we've been doing. And there'll be opportunity for you all to, again, you have our contact information. And can reach out, but just want to talk really quick about some of the projects and refinements we made, and then some other opportunities we have. But first, you might have seen this. Just wanted to sort of flag and close the loop on this transit conversation we've been having. Is they did release their refined transit service concept, and they are proposing having frequent service. This is trying that frequent service on Woodstock, 52nd and Flavel. So you can see that sort of the yellow lines on this blown up map here have, and then new service on 72nd, 72nd sort of service splits here. But it is removing this red line, some service on Duke and Herald. And so just again, flagging that you can go to trimet.org/forward for more information. These rollouts are going to happen sort of in pieces over time. But that website will give you the most up-to-date information about that rollout. So just wanted to mention that, and then we shared this project idea booklet out with you all. I believe Bill sent it out on Thursday or Friday. And so again, I'm not going to go through just in the interest of time every one of these projects, but this is what the booklet looks like. So we have the corridors, and for each tier 1 project, what's new from what you saw last time is really a more refined recommendation. So we're calling out, for example, on 52nd here, where there's sidewalk gaps that need to be filled, where potential crossings could be. And then also we have a planning level cost estimate for each of these projects. A lot of these projects, you'll see the cost estimate and you'll be like, wow, that is ridiculously expensive. What's going on? It's because a lot of these signals are need to be replaced, and signals cost a lot of money to replace. And so they're with this planning level estimates in the range of around $2 million. So that bumps up the project, the cost a lot. What we're working on now is actually refining out some of those signal costs so that you'll be able to see a sort of more nuanced cost estimate if we didn't include the signals. So that's forthcoming, but this is what each of the projects look like. Again, encourage you to to either, just take a look at these. And if you have comments or feedback and you're like, why are you proposing a crossing, at Steel and 44th or whatever it is, it would be great for us to sort of get that, the extra set of eyes on these before we share these publicly. So encourage you to take a look at that. And if there's any other improvements, thoughts you have, definitely let us know. And then again, the gravel streets, so that's why the local streets, that's why we're not showing that nuanced, is we're proposing in that plan draft that you'll see sort of a more holistic approach to looking at these things and more programmatic. So thinking about recommending things like periodic traffic counts and monitoring issues. So that's just why those aren't separated out in that booklet. And then just really quick about funding, because we did want to talk about sort of implementation of these projects. Unfortunately, we're in this place right now where funding new projects is challenging, and it's getting more challenging. We've just had a loss sort of with our revenue sources in terms of some gas tax and parking revenues have just continually declined over the last few years. And so it's we're continually struggling to find funding for new projects. There are ways that we can fund some of those larger, big projects. Woodstock is one example that I mentioned, or sort of the signal rebuilds and the whole package on 52nd that are more like the $5 to $10 million range. We have these federal funding opportunities that are that go through Metro called regional flexible funds. They are competitive, and they use a specific criteria to weigh those projects. But we can advance projects like Woodstock, for example, is one of those sort of big projects that has a lot of needs on it, a lot of crossings, signal rebuilds, those types of things. But those do take several years to kind of get to construction. And then we have less expensive projects that are that we can, so for those less expensive projects, we can look at some other revenue sources like fixing our streets, other funding sources that we have that pop up to also advance those. And then also are able to sort of leverage existing projects, sometimes like repaving. I'll mention one of those in a second to address some immediate issues. But I saw, Mike, do you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, do we not get any money from the bipartisan infrastructure bill for any of these improvements?
We are applying for grants for different projects, but not anything targeted in this area. So that could be another opportunity. A lot of times they've been focused a lot on things like bridges and vision, like sort of really high crash corridors. So we've applied for a grant for 122nd Avenue, for example, last year. But those could be new opportunities as well. So we're continuing to track those grant opportunities. Yeah. So that's another good example though, of things that can come up and might not be on this list, but then we can go after them. So yeah, thanks definitely for bringing that up. One of those opportunities that we've mentioned this before though is leveraging opportunities. This is a project on 52nd Avenue where we can easily do restriping with these when these streets are repaved. This is the section between Duke and Clovell, and curb ramps are always replaced with that work. So we can start beginning a design. We talked about this design on the bottom right, a parking protected bike lane option. And then we'll be advocating and looking for funding for to do the adequate protection for that bike lane, and also address some of the sidewalk gaps that we have in this section. So again, just an example of opportunities that can arise through things like repaving. And then we're also again trying to address immediate needs that come up. This is a location that we've had a lot of feedback on in the plan process. For anyone that follows Bike Portland, this was recently highlighted over the weekend or last week, just how dangerous this intersection is. And so we're looking at different funding sources, not only to sort of address this quick turn where we're seeing a lot of crashes, a lot of property damage, but also it's where the bike lane just ends between 69th and 72nd. So we're exploring some funding to address that. Probably not do everything that needs to happen here with curb and gutter and making it really nice, but at least making it a bit more visible in the short term. And then just wanted to sort of also note that we have funded projects happening in the area as well. So sidewalk infill and crossings on Duke and Papel, that's going to be coming hopefully later this year or early next year. The Knapp Ogden Neighborhood Greenway at the same time. 70s Neighborhood Greenway, which is a number of streets in the 70s, should begin construction very soon. And then we're starting design on the 60s Greenway. And then on 82nd Avenue, we are having multiple crossings that are going to be funded and moving forward, and also repaving that street. So that's both in the lower southeast area, but also further north. So there's a lot of things that are already funded that were previously funded before this plan, but that will be moving forward. So I think that's just in the interest of time, I'm going to stop there. I know that was a lot, but feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or comments on that project booklet. And other than that, I also just wanted to, before we turn it over to Gina, mention that if you feel like there's something that's like itching in the back of your mind, like, oh, I really wish that this project team would be talking about X or Y in my neighborhood, and we haven't really had a chance to flesh that out. Before we start drafting the plan, please drop us a line and let us know, oh, I really wish you'd be looking at X or Y. This is the time to do that before we really get into development of the plan. And we want to make sure that we feel like we're reflective of your all's ideas and priorities. But with that, I wanted to turn it over to my colleague, Gina Gastaldi, who's here to talk about another exciting funded project in Brentwood, Arlington. So Gina.
Yeah, hey, everybody. Brian, are you running the slide deck or should I share my screen?
I can go ahead and do it.
Okay.
Let me pull it up first.
Yeah, hey, everybody. Gina Gastaldi, she, her pronouns. I'm with PBOT. I'm the interim pedestrian coordinator. Nice to meet you all. Thanks so much for taking time. And I have kids who are tired and getting grumpy. So if I'm interrupted, it's, we're getting close to bedtime and I'm solo tonight. So apologies for that. I'll make this brief. I just wanted to come to your group and thank you for the time again to talk about a project we're calling Trees in the Curb Zone. This is a pilot. You can advance the slide, Brian. Thank you. This is a pilot project that we are implementing. I'm the project manager for this project. I applied for a grant with the Bureau of Environmental Services, also known as BES, for their Percent for Green grant. And we actually won the full allotment for this year. So it's $500,000 and then a 10% PBOT match. So total project budget is $550,000. And the Percent for Green program collects system development charges. So a fee that's collected from developers, and it uses that money to fund large scale infrastructure and green investments. And so you can go ahead and advance the slide. And really the benefits are for watershed and community benefits. So I submitted an application and we won. The goal of this Trees in the Curb Zone project is really to develop a framework for planting trees in the curb zone or in the parking area. Another way to think about it is really thinking about reallocating parking spaces for street trees. This is in collaboration with Portland Parks and Rec's Urban Forestry team, the Bureau of Environmental Services, the Water Bureau, and others, with that end goal of really constructing tree space in the curb/parking zone. So why do we want to plant trees in the curb zone? Why is a transportation agency wanting to plant trees in the street? You know, there's a lot of benefits that trees provide: green stormwater management, helping to mitigate the urban heat island effect through increased canopy, reducing urban air pollution, could potentially be a traffic calming device, and it can actually extend the street's livability by lowering the pavement deterioration by increasing the shade on the street. But really, for the sake of this project and the way that I've been thinking about it, is that we just often don't have enough space behind the right of way, or I'm sorry, behind the curb. So bumping out into the parking zone may be our only option. This is a photo, or this is a Google Street View of Northeast Fremont over by Lewitt View Park, and you can see the kids walking. So this is an example of a type of street that we would potentially, you know, look at doing a project like this on, where it's a curb tight sidewalk. It's a collector street. There's really nowhere to put a street tree. It's incredibly hot. So in this scenario, you know, you're either going from the back of the sidewalk and buying private property, which is incredibly expensive, or you're bumping out into the street. As Brian talked about, we have such limited funding that rebuilding this entire curb out, you know, 4-6 feet and rebuilding that entire curb line is just prohibitively expensive. So we thought, you know, what if we do kind of intermittent strategic tree plantings along that curb space? Slide. So we have policy backing for this. PED-PDX, which is our citywide pedestrian plan, has action 8.6 that says providing trees within the curb zone intermittently with on-street parking. You know, when we have limited right-of-way, might be a way to provide straight space for trees. And then coming out of PED-PDX was an update to our pedestrian design guide, and B.5.3 in that guide talks about extending the furnishing zone into the curb zone, and really starts to take that idea of action 8.6 and PED-PDX a step further with what could this actually look like with some criteria. And I'll just say, in the PED design guide process, one of the main pieces of feedback that we heard from the public, and even had a 2-hour administrative rule hearing, where the number one thing we heard was trees, trees, trees. You know, we want more space for trees from the tree advocacy side. You know, people really pushing PBOT and the commissioner at the time to think creatively and innovatively about how we can get more tree canopy in places like Brentwood, Darlington, where you have a ton of curb tight sidewalks, or East Portland, tons of curb tight sidewalks, and really high summer temperatures. So there are a couple examples of this in Portland that we can draw from, which is great. Southeast Hawthorne at 46. This was a one-off installation. You'll see the 2 tree wells in the parking zone here. This was done, again, a one-off installation with PBOT and BES, and it was never intended to be replicated. So this wasn't ever designed and built in such a way that it was intended to be replicated across the city, which is how I'm thinking of this pilot work. And then we have Directors Park too, which is a great example of trees intermittent in the parking zone, but this was a full block redesign with the park, totally different context, and different kind of project budget. You know, I'm really interested in coming up with a pilot that can be replicated, and that can be cost effective, and that can be just a little bit easier to do than a full, we don't often get full city block and street redesigns. Next slide. So real quick, we did a peer cities review, you know, what are other cities doing? How are other cities thinking about this? And we talked to quite a few other cities like Seattle, Washington, Frenchtown, New Jersey, New York City. Right here in Wilsonville, Oregon, actually the bottom right slide of the tree in this kind of scored pattern of the parking is in Wilsonville, which is pretty interesting. Oakland, Reno, and Vegas are all doing some kind of version of this. So it's always great to have other cities to point to, and New York even sent us over their drawings, which was great. Next slide. So these are diagrams from the pedestrian design guide. thinking about kind of what are the criteria, when would we actually do this? You know, there needs to be on-street parking that we can remove, that we can reallocate for trees in this case. Needs to be a curb tight sidewalk, so a sidewalk where it doesn't have that furnishing zone, that green space where we could plant a tree. Or potentially it has a really narrow furnishing zone, like in my neighborhood, some of the furnishing zones are maybe 12, 16 inches, really narrow, because I'm in East Portland, so things were just built to a different standard. There obviously needs to be a lack of underground utilities. We can't get close to a ton of things, but for example, we can't get close to water lines, sewer lines, manhole covers, any kind of stormwater inlets, gas lines, water laterals. There's all kinds of things happening under the street, kind of a layer cake, if you will. And we need to be really careful to not touch any of that stuff or get close to it. And then we also have streets where we've said that we won't build curb extensions on because we don't want to preclude or get in the way of like a future bike lane or future transit. So there's just all these kind of things we need to think about before we just go and build this kind of living infrastructure in the street, because the last thing that we want to do is, you know, damage a tree in the future. So really trying to find the right place that these trees can be healthy and provide all the benefits that we want. And you'll see the top example here. This is more what we're thinking, or kind of where we're heading with this, where there's a standalone curb extension kind of tree well that has a 1 foot channel, so that we're not actually touching the existing sidewalk, and there'll be a channel for stormwater to move through. Next slide. So other criteria for this grant and how we got to Brentwood Darlington is, Brentwood Darlington, and I did a heat analysis using Professor Shondas from PSU's work, and we put to realize that there's kind of a cluster of streets in Brentwood Darlington that actually are some of the hottest streets and intersections in the entire city. Next slide. So I took that data along with about 30 streets really popped out using all that criteria that I described from the pedestrian design guide. And then, wanting to focus on either kind of lower Southeast or East Portland. And this cluster of streets jumped out to me of Southeast Flavel from 72nd to 92nd, Southeast Duke from 72nd to 92nd, Woodstock from 82nd to 92nd, and Holgate from about I-205 to 104th Avenue. So you'll see a map here of the urban heat island. So the darker the red, the hotter the temperature. Some of you might have caught an article, I think it came out in 21, that said that Woodstock and 92nd was the hottest intersection in the city of Portland during the heat dome. And Duke and Flavel are not too far off. Next slide. I also looked at the equity matrix. So the darker the color, the higher the equity score. So you'll see there's some census tracts, particularly east of 82nd, between 82nd and 92nd, that are also darker color. So just kind of putting together all the different pieces of information as we're thinking about which street to invest this $500,000 on. Next slide. And then, we're a transportation bureau, so we're interested in average daily traffic and average speed. Just for the sake of time, I don't want to go too far into the equity score, Mike. Brian can send over our PBOT equity matrix, and there's a whole methodology behind that, and it's something that PBOT uses. Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to get into that right now, just so I can finish with this presentation, but thank you for bringing that up. So we wanted to look at traffic and traffic volumes, the number of cars using the street, and then the speed. And so because we haven't really done this on a corridor, there you go. Since we haven't done this on a corridor approach, we wanted to pick a street that had lower volumes, lower speed, but that wasn't like tucked away in a residential street. We really want to have eyes on this project. People can see it, see what we're doing. And then just, I've worked with Brian as well, thinking about all of the development that's coming potentially to this area, that could be coming to this area, not wanting to put these in spots, like Woodstock that just has a ton going on. So it's a tricky dance here, but we feel like Duke, between 72nd and 92nd, the volumes are lower and the speeds are lower. Our traffic engineers are feeling more comfortable with that. So I explored, oh, thanks, Brian. There's a link to the equity matrix in the chat. So then the next layer down, I'm walking you through all these kind of steps of analysis that have taken place to prepare for the grant once I won the grant, and then what we've done to figure out what street we're actually going to build on. Again, thinking about the different multimodal improvements coming to Brentwood, Darlington, not wanting to get in the way of any sidewalk inflow, make sure contractors aren't stepping on each other. So just was aware that, you know, taking into account that Duke is getting sidewalk, or Duke's getting sidewalk infill only on the south side and a couple of crossings. Go ahead. And again, this was actually I pulled from the Lower Southeast Rising Planning Study, taking even a little bit more of a zoomed in view of what the heat index is looking like in this particular neighborhood. Next slide. So the project team and engineers, we've landed on Duke from 72nd to 92nd Avenue. Because of all of those underground utility conflicts, like I described on Duke, the water line runs on the south side of the street. So we can only do trees in the street, trees in the curb zone on the north side of the street. We've looked at all those criteria that I talked about, the underground utilities. We have to look at where driveways are, bus stops, you know, alleys, cross streets, just all these things. And we've laid out, we found roughly 44 places where we think that we can, that this would be possible. It's not like a perfect match yet. You'll see some blocks get more, some blocks get less. It's just every block is so unique depending on where driveways hit, where stormwater and catch basins hit. It's just, it's pretty challenging even to find. I was happy we could find 44 sites. So what we're looking at is doing these trees on the north side of the street, reallocating that on-street parking. And since we can't offer any trees on the south side of the street, working with all of those property owners to provide free yard trees for anyone that wants them. So hoping to kind of offset the cross section a little bit in that way. Next slide. So what exactly is this project doing? It's site refinement, design, and construction of these tree curb bump outs. And we are also going to be doing the maintenance and ownership. I'll talk about more of that in a second. Doing outreach to all the property owners and occupants on the street, offering to plant yard trees for any neighbors on the south side of the street that would like them. And then really creating those standards and guidance and methodology so that this can be applied more broadly and that this doesn't become a one-off project. Next slide. The timeline. So, hey, honey. We are in the technical refinement and outreach with communities phase. We've just done our first site visit week before last and walked the corridor and mapped and found, you know, driveways that weren't mapped accurately and the gas connects and things like that. So we're really fine tuning, and that 44 number on the north side will go down as we fine tune exactly where these things can go and work with adjacent property owners. And we'll be doing continued outreach and refinement this summer and into the fall, and really hoping to get under construction this fall so that we're ready for tree planting season in the winter. Obviously don't want to plant trees in the summer. We want to give them the best chance of survival. So hoping to plant trees in the winter and then wrap up the project in the spring. One thing I didn't include here, but I think is important, is so typically a tree is the adjacent property owner's responsibility. We don't really think it would be fair to go into an area that we've identified as a higher equity area, and that and ask folks to not only maintain, but maintain them in perpetuity. So we're actually doing a code amendment. I'm in the process of working through that now, that these street trees will be the maintenance and ownership responsibility of the city of Portland. So that is a pretty big change, actually. And something I've been working on behind the scenes with our city attorney's office to get all lined up, but these won't be the adjacent property owners' responsibility as far as we're working on right now. Next slide. So next steps, just we're finalizing that corridor design, really refining those points with Urban Forestry and the Water Bureau to make sure that we have everything mapped accurately. That community engagement piece, refining our engineering drawings, and then refine those individual planting locations. Next slide. There's a project website, portland.gov/transportation/planning/trees-curb-zone, little long, sorry. And then here's my contact information, gina.gastaldi@portlandoregon.gov. If you have questions or clarifications or want to send my info around, that would be totally fine. I'm also in chat with the Brentwood Darlington Neighborhood Association to give a similar presentation to that group. So if there's anyone else that that I need to be in touch with, I would definitely be open to that.
Thanks, Gina. And I just mentioned Scott sort of talked in the chat or left a comment in the chat about sort of the emphasis of the trees on the north side of the street won't cool the asphalt and heat island effect as much.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, do you want to talk a little bit about that or I can?
Yeah, Scott, it is. So when the PED design guide came out, and part of the reason I even started this analysis as kind of a side project was because I heard there was two camps of people. Some people were like, so excited, oh my God, we're gonna have trees in the street everywhere. And some people were like, oh no, we're gonna have trees in the street everywhere. Like, and we didn't know because we haven't done it. We hadn't mapped that criteria before. Like, what does that actually look like? Yeah, one sec, honey. Let me just finish talking to these guys, okay? So when we actually mapped it, and then you add the water line in, which if anyone followed the Outer Division project and how that all unfolded with the street trees, you know, it's a really tricky issue. So we know with this project, it's a pilot. It's not going to be perfect. Like, it was so hard to find a corridor, a 1 mile corridor that we could do this on. I think, you know, potentially in the future, or as I'm already starting to think about other sites, like, you know, maybe we do more of like a district scale or, yes, I hear you. It's not perfect. There's also overhead wires throughout a lot of the corridor. So even the tree species will have to be a little bit smaller. Yeah. But we feel like smaller trees that maybe aren't on the south side are still better than no trees. And, you know, like Brian was saying, there's just such funding gaps.
Just do it now.
Hey, one sec. Look, at everyone can hear you. That sorry, I lost my train of thought. Yes, trying to not make the perfect be the enemy of the good here, and hopefully it's a pilot. You know, the end goal is really getting those standard drawings and getting PBOT folks, MBES and water comfortable with even doing something like this.
Thanks.
Mommy!
Oh,
yeah,
honey,
thanks
they
for
can
coming.
hear you.
I know we're at time, so if folks need to you know, head out, feel free. Don't feel like you have to stick on. But I'm happy to also stick around for a few minutes. Gina, if you need to head out, I'll do my best to answer questions as well. I saw that Anna had her hand raised. So
Yeah, I have a quick question, Gina. Thank you for hanging in there with the kids. I have a question about this kind of heat island investigation or research, because we were wondering with our students at PSU, I'm in the architecture department, and we did some initial research on it, and we were wondering why certain heat islands are so prominent in this area, and some of it seemed to have to do with like air movement in the city that's impacting that, or the reduction of that. And the other one seemed to be associated with large public traffic at certain points, especially around schools where you have a lot of impact of cars coming in and out, that might spike some of the heat accumulation. And then I was also wondering, to the point that Scott raised, the trees on the north side. I think as long as there's also shade on the facades of the buildings, that's also contributing to better air movement, that it actually moves out. So I think anything green in the street will help.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I actually, do you teach at PSU architecture? Is that what
Yeah.
you're saying? Oh, that's my undergrad, PSU architecture. Yeah, small world. So yeah, love that program. Professor Vivek Chandas did the urban heat island research. And so there's a great article that was in the Willamette Week last year that really goes into why certain land uses and context, has a lot to do with when things were built and the standards to which things were built. I mean, it's pretty obvious when you're driving through the inner neighborhoods with these really large trees and large furnishing zones, and they have that space to grow. And then coming out, like I'm in Montevilla east of 82nd, and just how hot, I mean, you can't even walk along 82nd or 92nd in a lot of the summer, it's just too hot. So, I think there's a lot of reasons about the built environment and the development standards that things were built to. And, we are losing a lot of trees to private development as well. And he mentions that in the article, just some of the larger form trees that have been lost through redevelopment. So, putting trees in the street might be actually one of the safer places for them to go, because they're not going to be at risk to be lost during redevelopment. Okay, sorry. I lost the second part of your question, Anna, because I've got a tired 4-year-old next to me.
Yeah, no, I just wonder if certain models are also run about, especially when we have larger developments happening for the air movement.
Yeah, Professor Chandas talks about the air movement in his article too, and about, some of the newer developments and the proximity to the freeway, and just these really large intersections. I know the intersection of 82nd and Stark also registered as one of the hottest intersections, and it's just all asphalt, it's all asphalt. Yeah, the cool pavement technology is really interesting. That's something that Phoenix and Los Angeles, Mike Kennedy posed that in the chat. That's something that those cities are doing, which makes a lot of sense. I work really closely with our pavement manager, and that's a bug I keep putting in his ear, that it would be really interesting to do some experimentation with that. For the sake of this project, yeah, it's just outside of the scope of this project, but I know it's something that we've talked about. And I'm working with urban forestry to, they'll do the tree species selection, but things that are native or drought and heat tolerant. And we'd like to have a menu of tree options that the residents and property owners could select from when we're offering the trees.
Thanks, Gina.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, we're excited about the project and how this sort of aligns with some of the work we're doing, and we'll try to sort of coordinate some of the outreach as well, as we're going out with the plan draft, and then have this project as well. So more to come, but thanks, Gina. I know you can jump out, get kids to bed.
Thank you so much for the
yeah.
time, everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I really appreciate everyone sticking around a little bit longer. So just for those that are still here, I just wanted to mention, again, I will be not on the next meeting, unfortunately, but Bill and Shane will be, and Zeph and the team, and the idea is that we'll have a draft plan for you all to react to at that time. So if you have, again, thoughts, comments about land use or the transportation projects, definitely let us know soon, so we can have a follow-up conversation or address those comments. Otherwise, we'll continue to keep working and share out a more, really a document that's outlining all these recommendations and we can go through those in the next meeting.
Thanks, Brian. And
That next meeting, if we continue to follow our fourth Monday of the each month, that would be February 27th. And so the intent is to share an initial draft before we go out to the broader public, and then provide an opportunity for you to provide feedback to us and to make further refinements before we send it out more broadly. So thanks, everyone. Really appreciate your sacrificing so much of a Monday night to this meeting.
I just want to elevate Mike's comment really quick. Sorry, I know we're wrapping up, but I also want to second Brian if the request of like understanding what are some of the practices, like, because I know that what you were saying is like there's not going to be a lot of repavement, but for the areas that will be repaved, are there any considerations around like cool technologies or like impervious pavement or like some of these other kind of like new practices that are coming out? And I know there isn't a lot of examples, like Milwaukee has one, and I think Multnomah County has one, but just wondering how you're taking sort of like those practices into consideration would be helpful.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think like Gina was saying, you know, she keeps putting a bug in the ear of our pavement manager. We do as well, but it's always helpful to sort of have that at multiple angles. So it's something that we can. That's a great idea to sort of have as a sidebar, for example, in the plan, sort of saying that, you know, holistically, if we're repaving streets, either converting gravel streets to paved streets or resurfacing, something to consider. So yeah, thanks for that comment.
Thank you.
And any other ideas that you all have like that, you know, definitely let us know. Yeah, want to capture as many of those as possible. Great, well, thanks everyone. I can stick around for a minute or two, but otherwise have a great evening. And
Thank you, Brian.
I'll be at ribbon cuttings when they happen, so I'm not going to be gone. So we'll get projects built, and then I'll come back and celebrate with y'all. So
Okay.
yeah, thanks everyone.
Thanks
Thank
everyone for
you.
your work. Congratulations,
evening.
Brian.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll stop recording.